Welcome back to the show. Today we are tearing down the old map of the Middle East and looking at a fundamental geopolitical transformation that has been unfolding right in front of us. One that many observers overlooked for years because almost every eye in the international community was fixed squarely on Tehran. When people discuss regional rivalries and existential security challenges in the Middle East, the conversation traditionally goes straight to Iran, its nuclear program, and its vast network of non-state proxies stretching from Lebanon to Yemen. But while the global focus remained locked on the Persian Gulf, another massive shift was taking place to the north, a structural realignment that is arguably just as consequential for the long-term balance of power. We're talking about Turkey. Under Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Ankara has systematically dismantled its old diplomatic playbook. For decades during the Cold War and its immediate aftermath, Turkish foreign policy was defined by caution, a firmly westward orientation, and the famous doctrine of zero problems with neighbours. Today, that posture is entirely gone. In its place is a confident, assertive, and nationalist foreign policy aimed at establishing Turkey not merely as a regional player, but as an independent pole of power bridging Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Ankara has projected its influence deep into Syria, northern Iraq, Libya, the Horn of Africa, the Caucasus, and the Eastern Mediterranean. And in executing this ambitious expansion, Turkey has increasingly set itself on a collision course with Israel, transforming a historical partnership into one of the most complex strategic rivalries in the Eastern Mediterranean. To truly grasp how profound this shift is, it helps to step back and look at where these two nations stood just 30 years ago. During the 1990s, Turkey and Israel enjoyed what many analysts considered a golden age of strategic cooperation. They were the two strongest non-Arab democracies in the region, both closely aligned with the United States. Israeli defense firms upgraded Turkish fighter jets and tanks. Turkish pilots trained alongside the Israeli Air Force. Intelligence sharing on regional threats was routine, and bilateral trade flourished. It was a partnership rooted in mutual security needs and a shared sense of standing apart from the surrounding political landscape. Fast forward to the present day, and that framework has entirely unraveled. The collapse was not sudden. It was a steady, multi-decade drift driven by fundamental ideological, political, and strategic divergence. Trade agreements have been restricted or suspended. Diplomatic ties have repeatedly broken down, and the language coming out of Ankara toward Jerusalem is no longer that of a hesitant partner, but of a fierce, self-declared defender of regional opposition to Israeli policy. So how did Turkey build the capacity to project power so aggressively? And why does Jerusalem view Ankara's rise through such a uniquely cautious lens? To answer that, you have to look at four main pillars that underpin Turkey's modern power projection. The first pillar is Turkey's military-industrial independence. In the past, Ankara was heavily reliant on foreign weapons suppliers, particularly the United States and European nations. However, after facing arms embargoes, political delays, and friction with NATO allies over the past 2 decades, Turkey made a deliberate national decision to build a self-sufficient defense sector. Today, Turkey manufactures everything from armored vehicles and naval frigates to advanced ballistic missiles and electronic warfare systems. But the crown jewel of this effort is its uncrewed aerial vehicle program, most notably the Bayraktar drones. These platforms proved immensely effective in battlefields across Libya, Syria, Nagorno-Karabakh, and Ukraine. More importantly, domestic production means Ankara can deploy military force or export hardware to allies without requiring a green light from Washington or European capitals. This strategic autonomy allows Turkey to act fast, act decisively, and sustain long-term foreign operations on its own terms. The second pillar is Turkey's direct physical presence in the Levant and Northern Africa. Through a series of military cross-border operations, Turkey established a permanent footprint in northern Syria and northern Iraq. In Syria, Ankara controls significant territory, manages local governance, and maintains tens of thousands of troops on the ground. This places Turkish power directly on Israel's northern horizon. Where Israel once viewed its northern front primarily through the lens of Syria, Hezbollah, and Iranian militia movements, it now has to account for a massive conventional NATO military operating permanently inside the Syrian theatre. The third pillar is maritime doctrine and the battle for resources in the Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey champions a strategic maritime framework known as Mavi Vatan, or Blue Homeland. This doctrine asserts expansive Turkish claims over energy resources, continental shelves, and maritime borders across the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean. This directly collides with the Eastern Mediterranean gas architecture built over the last decade by Israel, Greece, Cyprus, and Egypt. When Israel began tapping into significant offshore natural gas fields, it sought to export energy to European markets via pipelines and electrical interconnectors running through Mediterranean waters. Ankara viewed this trilateral cooperation between Israel, Greece, and Cyprus as an attempt to isolate Turkey from its own backyard. By drawing contentious maritime boundaries with Libya and deploying naval research vessels backed by warships, Turkey effectively signalled that no major energy or infrastructure project in the Eastern Mediterranean can proceed without Ankara's agreement. The fourth pillar is ideological and soft power leadership. Turkey under Erdogan has explicitly positioned itself as a champion of the broader Sunni Muslim world and a fierce advocate for the Palestinian cause. Ankara has provided safe haven, diplomatic legitimacy, and operational freedom to senior Hamas political leaders over many years. This is not merely a tactical stance. It is a core element of Turkey's attempt to claim moral and political leadership across the Arab and Islamic worlds, filling a vacuum left by traditional Arab capitals that have either normalized relations with Israel or turned inward to deal with domestic economic challenges. Now, why does this combination make Turkey a fundamentally different kind of challenge for Israel compared to traditional adversaries? When Israeli strategists look at Iran, they see an ideological enemy operating primarily through asymmetrical means: non-state proxies, armed militias, covert networks, and ballistic missiles. Iran is economically isolated, heavily sanctioned, and structurally constrained by international pressure. Turkey is a completely different entity. Turkey is a major formal state actor. It possesses the second largest standing army in NATO. It boasts a diversified economy, a sophisticated industrial base, and deep institutional ties to the Western security apparatus. You cannot deal with Turkey using the same toolkit used for non-state actors or isolated regimes. Sanctions, covert operations, or military deterrence carry vast diplomatic and geopolitical costs when applied to a NATO member state sitting at the intersection of Europe, Russia, and the Middle East. Furthermore, Turkey's strategy is not about destroying the international order, but reshaping regional rules to maximize its own leverage. When Ankara challenges Israeli air operations in northern airspace or asserts naval dominance in the Eastern Mediterranean, it does so using state-level diplomacy, international maritime law interpretations, and conventional military posture. This forces Jerusalem into a delicate balancing act. On one hand, Israel cannot ignore Ankara's support for hostile factions or its attempts to restrict Israeli maritime and energy ambitions. On the other hand, neither side benefits from a direct, overt military confrontation. Despite the fierce political rhetoric, economic interdependencies persist, and both capitals recognize that an open conflict would trigger catastrophic economic and geopolitical consequences across the entire region. Instead of open war, what we are seeing, and what we will likely continue to see for the next decade, is a disciplined long-term strategic contest. It is a competition for regional influence, energy routes, air and sea dominance, and political narrative. Israel has responded by deepening its military and intelligence ties with Greece, Cyprus, and key Gulf nations that share concerns over Turkish expansionism. Turkey, meanwhile, continues to leverage its geographic footprint, drone proliferation, and diplomatic weight to ensure that no major regional settlement can be made without its input. The fundamental takeaway is simple. The geopolitical landscape of the Middle East has expanded far beyond the old regional rivalries. The idea that Middle Eastern security is solely defined by the Arab-Israeli conflict or the Sunni-Shia divide is outdated. Turkey has re-emerged as a primary actor, a confident, self-reliant nation determined to reclaim its historic position as a dominant power in the Levant and Mediterranean. How Israel, the United States, and the broader international community adapt to this reality will shape the stability of the region for generations to come. What we are seeing develop is bad news for Israel. President Trump is seeking closer relations with Turkey, even offering the sale of F-35 jets. This would threaten Israel's superiority in the region. So watch this space. Things are about to get interesting.